God of mercy, you promised never to break your covenant with us. Amid all the changing words of our generation, speak your eternal word that does not change and does not hide behind falsehood. And then, having seen and heard, may we respond to your gracious promises with faithfulness and obedient lives. We pray these things through Jesus Christ. Amen. So we're reading two passages from the Old Testament. The first is the story of Exodus. The second is from Ezra. Two major periods in the life of Israel, both at a time of freedom and liberation, and that which came with it, apropos to our topic at hand today. So let us turn now to Exodus 12, verses 33 to 36. The Egyptians urged the people to hasten their departure from the land, for they said, "We shall all be dead." So the people took their dough before it was leavened, with their kneading bowls wrapped up in their cloaks on their shoulders. The Israelites had done as Moses told them, and they had asked the Egyptians for jewelry of silver and gold and clothing. And the Lord had given the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so they let them have what they asked, and so they plundered the Egyptians. And then from the book of Ezra. Thus says King Cyrus of Persia, "The Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and has charged me to build him a house at Jerusalem in Judah. Any of those among you who are his people, may their God be with them. And now they are permitted to go up to Jerusalem and Judah and rebuild the house of the Lord, the God of Israel. He is the God who is in Jerusalem, and let all survivors in whatever place they reside be assisted by the people of their place with silver and gold, with goods and with animals, besides free will offerings for the house of God in Jerusalem." All their neighbors aided them with silver vessels, with gold, with goods, with animals, and with valuable gifts, besides all that was freely offered. King Cyrus himself brought out the vessels of the house of the Lord that Nebuchadnezzar had carried away from Jerusalem and placed in the house of his gods. King Cyrus of Persia had them released into the charge of the treasurer, who counted them out to Sheshbazzar, the prince of Judah. And this was the inventory: golden bases 30, silver basins 1,000, knives 29, gold bowls 30, other silver bowls 410, other vessels 1,000. The total of gold and silver vessels was 5,400. All these Sheshbazzar brought up when the exiles were brought up from Babylon to Jerusalem. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. I have to set those in context a little bit, so we're going to do that first. The first is, by the time we read this passage in Exodus, great devastation has been brought across all of Egypt. We're at the end of the 10 plagues. And yet, despite destruction and terror, instead of setting the enslaved people free when things got bad, the leader was willing to sacrifice everyone and everything upon the altar of an economy built under free labor. I'm talking about Egypt, by the way. And here in this moment, they have been given their freedom, they're collecting their own things, and they're leaving, but they do not leave empty-handed, more than just their bread and their bowls thrown over their shoulder. The people of Egypt, without exception, give jewelry, silver, and gold clothing to the people as they're given their freedom, but the language there is very deliberate. If we're not careful, it sounds like, "Oh, wasn't that nice? They did a little charity for them as they went out the door." God wants it really clear to say that the people of Israel plundered Egypt. For all of those years of enslavement, free labor to build the great empire of Egypt, God says, no more, you will pay back. Because on some level we understand that the freedom that they've gotten is not freedom if they don't have access to finance. So they don't leave empty-handed. They go out in great company. And then in our passage in Ezra, which we may not be as familiar with unless you've been in the Bible study, this is the time of the end of the exile in Babylon. Now the people of Israel were exiled by Babylon, and King Cyrus comes to power, king of Persia, and decides to set them free to end the exile. No longer will they be in service to the king, and when he does, he demands that silver and gold and goods and animals and valuable gifts, as well as other treasure, force and free will offerings are given to them by the people. And then something else happens. I don't know if you caught it. The king goes to the treasury of all the things that they had stolen from the temple. And he doesn't set up a museum and says, hey, look what we discovered, and showed it to the people. Instead, they took everything out as it was recorded and gave it back to them, what belonged to the people. The king did not say, well, I'm not Babylonian, I didn't do it, so I'm entitled to keep it. Again, talking Babylon here. And at the end of the Civil War in the United States, what we know is reparations were given. Did you know that? They were given to the white southern landowners for the loss of the enslaved people that they owned. But we can't give reparations. But what about those who were enslaved? For a short moment, there was hope. 40 acres and a mule, some rogue general thought it was a good idea, but that wasn't going to happen. It never became the policy of the United States. Now, the conversation around reparations has come up, and generally it's, well, we can't do that, I didn't do that, we just can't do that. That's not possible. Unless you know anything about history. At other times, the United States has a history of paying reparations and supporting the payment of reparations. Various Native American tribes have received money in various forms as reparations. The Japanese Americans who we put in prison camps during World War II received reparations. And we made sure that Germany paid reparations to Israel following World War II. So here's the thing, it's not impossible. It's not without historic precedent. And frankly, it's not even a radical idea. And as followers of Jesus, it's kind of biblical too. But then we get to the American institution of slavery. And for African Americans, the answer is always, well, it's just too difficult. It was so long ago, can't we just get over it? If ever there was a time that I was about to move into meddling, today would be it. Because I'm just getting started. Some estimates say, economists believe that without the institution of slavery, the United States would have never created the amount of capital that it did in order to become a world economic power. We have this myth that somehow we just worked so hard. Well, somebody worked hard, but they just didn't get paid for it. And here's the trouble. Here's the trouble with the conversations around race and reparations. The issue is white people's ignorance. I told you I was going to meddle. So for the most part, except for folks who've come out of the woodwork these days, most white folk don't want to be called racist. And they would say white supremacy is a sin. And many want to figure out how to overcome the issues of race and make things better. But most of them think reparations are a really bad idea. We can have some conversations about race, that's good. We can share stories about how things haven't always gone so well, or our grandparents that we're kind of embarrassed by, but don't tie economics into this because that gets messy. That's a different thing altogether. But until white folks as a whole can embrace the idea that repair has to come, then the issues of race in this country will not change in any substantive way. Here's what's interesting. This is how split we are on this, right? National poll recently said that 15% of white people think reparations are a good idea. And now get this, only 54% of white people believe that the institution of slavery still has an impact today. Now, let me compare the numbers. In the same poll, they interviewed African Americans, and their support for reparations hovers somewhere around 75%. Talk about a split. And then 83% of them believe that the institution of slavery still has an impact today. As I said, I believe a lot of this has to do with white ignorance. When James Forman stood up at the Riverside Church in New York City in 1969 and gave what is known as the Black Manifesto, he called churches then, this is before my time, so we're still talking about this, we still haven't figured it out, and he made it clear that the churches have made quite a fortune because of the institution of slavery. That money can be traced to the foundation of many of our denominations that began and grew because of the slave trade. Now, the Presbyterian Church's response to this was to take a pot of money and to set it aside, and it's now called the self-development of people. We're still controlling who and who gets it, but that was the response there. Now, the Presbyterian Church has spent some time trying to figure out what to do with this concept of reparations. So one of the things they did was in 2004 was get a task force together to do some fact-finding. One, where is our denomination around this issue? It ain't great. We're worse than the national average. I'll get you there in a minute. But they also talked about the importance of study, about how we've been deliberately blinded, white folk now, about the history of why this simply makes sense. Their report that was given in 2004 showed that most white Presbyterians find the idea of reparations as a bad idea. 83%, way higher than the national average. Given our history, that should come as no surprise, because we just want to be nice, and that'll fix it. In that report also came the recommendation to study the Bell-Har Confession. And out of that study, and out of that work, that confession became part of our book of confessions. And the idea of reparations that was lifted up in that report, we're still studying that. But we aren't really studying. That's the thing. Some have even gone so far as to offer apologies for slavery. We know that Harvard, Yale, Brown, and Georgetown all admitted that they have benefited financially from the slave trade. Presbyterian Church is still working on that. In fact, 2 Protestant seminaries have gone beyond just simply apologizing. They actually put their money where their mouth was. They believed that it was their Christian duty to make things right. Even if they weren't the ones who actually did it, their foreparents had. Virginia Theological Seminary in Alexandria, Virginia, one of the flagships of the Episcopal Church seminaries, announced in September that they had set aside $1.7 million for a reparations fund given for those enslaved persons who once worked on the campus sorry, I'm getting all of it was given that any enslaved persons once worked on his campus, and the school participated in racial segregation even after slavery ended. So this fund was set up to help ameliorate their mistakes. You may have also heard that Princeton Seminary did them one better. In an announcement of a $27 million endowed fund for reparations, $1 million would be distributed annually. Repair. Actually doing something beyond saying, I'm sorry. Have you ever seen a simple thing we use with kids often is to take a piece of paper and we pretend like we call it names, and every time we do, we fold it up and wrinkle it up and wrinkle it up and wrinkle it up until it's just a ball. And then we take it and we fold it out and we say, you know what? I'm sorry for saying that. I'm sorry for saying that. We flatten it out as best we can. We lick it. And then you notice what happens with that piece of paper? Every one of those folds didn't go away. And we say to the kids, saying I'm sorry is not enough. Something has to be done. It has to be made right. The truth is, and I want to give credit to Jennifer Harvey in her most recent work, Dear White Christians. It's worth taking a look at, by the way, if you haven't. But so I'm going to hide behind her writing here for a minute. But the truth is that most white folk have a lot more work to do about all of this, because we haven't learned what really is going on. We have to unlearn some of the ways that we have been blinded. Because simply being non-white in the United States means that you have to know white folks to be safe. And white folk didn't realize that was going on. We have to relearn and unlearn that the real history of our country and the way race has shaped it, so that we can stop thinking that where we are in life is just an extension of our hard work. Generational opportunities afforded us, and the ignorance of our own history, talking to white folk now, and the history of race make it difficult for real relationships to form cross-racially. And the thing is, it's not fair to keep asking black folk to do our work for us. We have to learn how we participate and benefit from the systems of race. And then relationship can be even more real. It's no surprise to me that the numbers around reparations are what they are. It is because, as in my experience and others who write on this, that most white people are ignorant of the continuing power of race in our lives. We like to say, yes, but we had food stamps growing up. I got government cheese. That stuff's nasty. We also think on some level that if we just keep smiling and being nice, that somehow that's going to fix a system that's intended to keep us separated and to keep the oppressed even more oppressed. Somehow, if we do that, we think deep down, we may not even say it, that this guilt of benefiting from a system might just go away if we can be friendly. But it won't. So we have to get real. And that means, for those of us who are white, we've got to do some homework before we expect our brothers and sisters to educate us. It's our job. 2 weeks ago, the Presbytery issued an apology to our African American sisters and brothers for the institution of slavery and our participation in it, and for continuing participations in the system of race. I would read it to you, but it's really long. I have copies for anyone who would like to take a look. I took my time and I read through it. Unfortunately, I was not at the meeting. We did approve it. And it is a good start. In that apology, they called for action. They called for the church to study and learn. We've heard that before. But we actually have to do it this time. As well as work to be actively anti-racist in our congregations. There's a youth and young adult piece in there, but they're looking to do this in all of our congregations, as well as all pastors in the presbytery as well. There's a lot more to it, and copies, as I said, will be available. But it's important to know that it is a good start. because nowhere in there have we done any real digging in the history of the presbytery to figure out where some of our finances may be rested upon those who were formerly enslaved, and then figure out how to pay that back. But we've got some studying to do before that happens. Here's the thing. As people of faith, at the heart of our faith is naming when things are not right. When we gather at the table, we act as if we're gathering with Jesus at the table, tied to the past, claiming the past. We are a people who know what it means to claim the past. We have to do a better job of claiming all the past. And then when we come face to face where we fall short and the world around us is not right, then we have to do what's called repenting. This is the confession of sin. And occasionally I take it out of there, and I'm really not happy when we do, because it is at the center part of who we are. We have to name and recognize that it's not just because I kick somebody in the shin, but I might be participating in the system while I'm being nice to them in the process. We have to repent, we have to name, and then we're called to repair. And that's what Cyrus did. He made sure that they had everything they needed. The story goes on, and they got all that they needed in order to rebuild and to repair. I'm convinced that as a denomination, as a presbytery that is majority white, that there's a lot of work to do. And for the white members of Westminster, we have to go beyond the places of willed ignorance, hoping that a smile and kindness is all that's required to go deeper. But the first step is naming. Naming. To be open to recognizing that says, yes, I can't not be racist given the fact that I'm white and I live in a deeply racist system, and I have to be willing to be called account for the ways in which I actively participate and live that out in my relationships with all of you. Now here's the thing, when it comes to reparations, I don't have a plan for public policy. There's a lot of folks out there who are working it. John Conyers was one of them, has great work on this stuff. And I know that more work has to be done, and there's lots of different ways to engage it. But we know this, it is possible. It has been done before. And frankly, it's part of the cornerstone of our faith. When harm has been done, we have to repair, and that repair cannot be dictated by the perpetrator. Imagine, this is a pretty graphic image, but I'm sharing it to make it the point. Imagine someone murdered your child. And then the court decided that the woman who murdered your child got to decide what the punishment and the repair looked like. Who's up for that? Didn't think so. And yet, when it comes to issues like this, it's like, here, little bunny. Generational wealth. Well, it's biblical. And our faith tradition shows us that this is the way. This is the path. And then we have to figure out what it looks like. What might this look like for Westminster? Well, it would have to begin with a thorough examination of our history. Looking for the ways in which we participated and or benefited. We have work to do on that. Because when we tell history, we like to tell all the highlights, not the other parts. But we have to learn our other parts to come to grips with our history. And the good thing about being Presbyterian and good thing about this church is we have all the records going back to the very beginning of the church. All of them. Every minute from 1853 on. The question is, I told you I was meddling if you haven't figured that out yet. The question is will we have the courage to unearth what might be hiding in our past? What was the church doing in 1917 as East St. Louis burned? I don't know. We should. Here's the thing, as we try to discern our own future, I'm convinced of this, that there will not be a future unless and until we exorcise the demons of our past and work to repair the damage done. Defensiveness will not solve anything. Guilt will not solve anything. Arguments over the details of how reparations do and do not work, we can have those conversations. But first we have to figure out where we've been in the midst of them. And then recognize that as far as I can see, we want to choose another way. But the demons are still alive. And they need to be exorcised. And I believe it's possible. Otherwise, I wouldn't have preached on it.